Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 12 of series 10. The question for today is, what are the standard theories of consciousness and are any of them viable? Reading from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, chapter 6, section 3. So we have previously examined Cartesian dualism, moderate dualism, and a physicalist account of mind. And we examined Daniel Dennett's critique of Cartesian dualism and his account of physicalism. I won't examine dualism and physicalism again, but I want to discuss some other standard theories. These include positivism, behaviorism, identity theory, eliminative materialism, functionalism, dual aspect theory, and naturalist or biological theories. These are a lot of theories that seems to indicate disarray and a lack of understanding that I argue for elsewhere. Yet I will look at these theories in their chronological order, which also seems to indicate some progress. Next week I will examine some less common theories that are also great in number. These include pluralism, externalism, panpsychism, panprotopsychism, structuralism, and ultraphenomenological accounts. Yet I should start by briefly reviewing the two basic views of dualism and physicalism. And the most common standard theories of mind are variations on these two views. Descartes defined mind as thinking substance with his indubitable "I think, therefore I am." But this left mind unacceptably as a cognitive entity, as an incongruous substance, and with an inexplicable relations with the world. But moderate dualism is simply that mind and matter are two kinds of thing. One response to these views are various forms of physicalism, the majority view that we'll look at today. These views are basically saying that mind or consciousness isn't some separate mode of existence, but it is a very refined aspect of the physical world, like energy or light. The first of these views that we should look at is logical positivism. The physicalism of logical positivism can be traced to Auguste Comte's positivism that only hard facts count. He thought of progress as advancing from theology and metaphysics to a final stage of positive facts. Comte regarded sociology as social physics and sought to explain everything in physicalist terms. This view led to the subsequent logical positivism of the Vienna Circle, made up of people like Maurice Schlick, Ernst Mach, and Rudolf Carnap. In 1931, Carnap wrote the paper Psychology in the Language of Physics, which is a title that indicates his view. More specifically, he said that psychology is to be degraded into a part of physics, unquote. Like other logical positivists, he held that true science must be expressible in physical language, and that value judgments are senseless because they lack cognitive content. But Carnap and others never succeeded in describing mental events in physical terms. Yet A.J. Ayer still endorsed logical positivism through his epistemological principle of verification. That is, a proposition is only meaningful if it is subject to verification as either true or false. And his emotivist theory of ethics dismissed values as just emotions like laughing or crying. On this view, religious, ethical, poetic, intuitive, mythical, and value judgments are disregarded as meaningless. Ayer himself later rejected this view as excessive, but it nevertheless influenced philosophy of mind. The extremes of logical positivism led to thinkers like Gilbert Ryle to adopt logical behaviorism. Ryle's 1949 book, The Concept of Mind, argues that mind is a philosophical illusion caused by Cartesian missteps, logical errors, and category mistakes which have become habitual. Whatever the validity of Ryle's illusory concept of mind, his idea of a category mistake has since become a powerful philosophical tool, but it is uncertain that it shows that mind is an illusion. Yet it certainly shows that certain concepts of mind are illusory. Yet behaviorism is a materialist or physicalist position that reaches across both philosophy and psychology. It is the view that sees the meaning of mental states only in terms of actual or potential patterns of behavior. Yet behavioristic methods also seem to have some success when applied in the right way. For instance, the amorphous and hidden character of mind may be better revealed by its material expressions. One example of this is demonstrated by the difficult pursuit of self-knowledge or self-understanding. In this case, it is more informative to observe my actions than to try to understand my nature. But as a theoretical tool, it explains mind in terms far removed from experiences of the phenomenon itself. It relegates subjective states to the examination of physical behavior for scientific convenience, and behaviorism further accentuates the already existing neglect of consciousness. Moreover, behaviorism copes badly with paradigm cases of mental states with no outward signs of behavior, such as imagining, reflecting, perceiving, and centrally being aware of oneself and self-consciousness. The usual behaviorist explanation is that these are dispositions to act in some context or other. But some of these states have no readily known context or dispositions to act, and B.F. Skinner was forced to call this the problem of privacy. And one argument against the behaviorist account of sensation is that it must take place in the body, but there are actual as well as hypothetical cases where the mind and brain are isolated from the body. For example, Susan Greenfield's study of loss of all neural communication between mind and body. And we can imagine cases of isolating the mind from the body by surgery or drugs, where happiness and sadness would be experienced without any bodily counterpart. It seems, therefore, that behaviorist accounts of mind are deeply inadequate. In 1965, U.T. Place suggested that the solution to the problem of privacy was that the mind is nothing but the brain. This explanation of mind in terms of the brain is called the mind-brain identity theory. Yet even Place saw some limitations in this view. He, for example, wrote that there would seem to be an intractable residue of concepts clustering around the notions of consciousness and mental imagery. It is possible, of course, that a satisfactory behavioristic account will ultimately be found, and that the thesis that consciousness is a process in the brain cannot be dismissed on logical grounds." Unquote. The challenge to this view, made in many ways, is of course that mind and brain are different kinds of things. We will discuss some of these arguments later, but the physicalist recourse against the intuition that mind and brain are different is that this perception is mistaken. This mistake is commonly illustrated with the discovery that the morning star and the evening star are the same, or again, thunder and lightning are two different manifestations of the same phenomenon, an electrical discharge. The argument is that mind and brain will similarly be discovered to be the same phenomenon, but this remains to be seen pending both scientific discovery and countervailing arguments. However, On the explication of identity theory, it is in tune with modern science that seeks complete unification. That is, the world and knowledge of it must be a seamless whole without theoretical or ontological gaps. I will argue against this account of identity theory next week with the idea of ontological pluralism. Yet I've also argued that the scientific ideal of unification is an illegitimate inducement to monism rather than an argument for it. Yet the Australian philosopher J.C. Smart did argue for identity theory from the idea of the unity of science, and following this work, the mind-brain identity theory has often been called the Australian heresy. Going even further than identity theory, eliminative materialism claims that our common sense understanding of mind and mental states is deeply mistaken and that our ordinary mental language must be replaced. This is because ordinary mental language is regarded as irredeemably unscientific and misleading. But more than this, common sense mental states such as beliefs and desires do not exist. Even the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines eliminative materialism as the radical claim that some or all of the mental states posited by common sense do not actually exist. Yet Wilfrid Sellers, W.O. Quine, Richard Rorty and Paul Furban still held this view. But on Leibniz's principle of indiscernibles, that no two objects can have exactly the same properties, or conversely that two kinds of objects with different properties cannot be of the same kind, then physical brain states and phenomenal mind states cannot be the same kind of thing. I have made this point in saying that the amorphous, graduated, unobservable and unquantifiable nature of mind is not the same as quantifiable matter subject to a posteriori observations and contingent relations. And I'll reinforce the point with another contrast to a priori and necessary relations of logical abstractions. This difference is often more colloquially described as that between experiences like pain or pleasure and chemical or electrical events. But going even further than identity theory and eliminative materialism is a disappearance theory of mind. This view is held by Richard Rorty and Paul Furban and is a stronger variant of eliminative materialism. It is the view that mental states like pain and love should be replaced by brain states, for example, C fibers, and that talk about mental states is outdated, like talk about demons and witches. But it's questionable that terms like volition, belief and desire can be eliminated from mental descriptions. There's a parallel here with Bertrand Russell's replacement of natural language with symbolic logic. That is, it is widely held that symbolic logic lacks the descriptive abilities of natural language. Yet John Searle goes further to say that irreducible intentionality would be fatal to physicalism. But he adds it would be a rather hollow victory for the anti-physicalist if he could defeat his opponent only at the cost of admitting something of which he was equally incapable of giving any satisfactory explanation. But here phenomenologists can cite not only the structure of intentionality, but other structures like temporality, graduation, visibility, insubstantiality, and insularity. In a brief defense of this view, consciousness exists, and because it exists, it must have properties. And with others, I argue that those properties are best explained as structures. We can also note that many leading philosophers are critical of the physicalist or materialist position. Anthony Grayling, for example, states that the fact of consciousness is indisputable. Its importance is supreme. Gallen Strawson and Ian McGilchrist also criticise these forms of physicalism, saying that this particular denial is the strangest thing that has ever happened in the whole history of human thought, not just the whole history of philosophy. Unquote. One attempt to escape all the above problems is the approach to mind called functionalism. Functionalism defines mind and mental states by their role or what they do rather than what they are. Pain, for example, might be defined as a state caused by bodily injury, leading to action to be free of it. And what makes a mental state a state is not its physical composition, like a brain state, but what makes it a state is the role it plays in the system. Yet with respect to brain states, functionalism also identifies mental states by its causal connections to other mental states, sensory inputs and behaviour. And it claims that the same mental state can be realised in different physical systems or brains. This contrasts with the idea that specific mental states are tied to specific brain structures. Functionalism also claims to be an improvement over behaviourism, which only focuses on observable behaviour. Belief, for example, could be a state caused by sensory input that influences other mental states, leading to action. And functionalism is often explained by analogy to computers. That is, the mind is the computer program and the hardware of the brain executes the software of mental states. Hilary Putnam, for example, wrote that, according to functionalism, the behaviour of, say, a computing machine is not explained by the physics and chemistry of the computing machine, it is explained by the machine's program. Unquote. But some argue that functionalism cannot account for subjective, qualitative experiences like the feeling of pain. Experiences like pain also don't have propositional content that could figure as programmable material. And Thomas Nagel holds that a functionalist account of consciousness cannot be properly given. So functionalism fails to answer the basic question, what is mind or consciousness? Yet another attempt to answer this question is made by regarding mind as an aspect of nature. One version of this view claims that everything is nature, therefore mind must be an aspect of nature. But this approach is mistaken in at least two ways. One is that when a word is defined as meaning everything, it becomes meaningless. Another is that nature is commonly defined by contrast in many ways. Social science, for example, commonly employs a valid nature-nurture distinction between what people are genetically and what people are by reason of social conditioning and learning. Moral philosophy also places moral choices outside of nature, with such arguments as More's naturalistic fallacy and Hume's is-or distinction. And we can also argue that even if mind is produced by genetics, it need not be the same kind of thing as nature. For example, life is produced by biology and is a part of nature, but life is a different kind of thing to matter. Yet more relevantly, abstract thought, logic and mathematics are produced by mind, but these abstractions are not part of natural psychology. Gottlob Frege argued and proved this distinction in his case against psychologism. Yet John Searle views consciousness as a biological phenomenon in that it's an emergent property of the brain. That is, it's causally reducible to brain processes, but not ontologically reducible. This means that it's caused by, but is not the same as the physical brain as in identity theory. We have seen that Searle provides a provisional definition of consciousness as all the states that we experience. And we have also previously defined mind as a general category of which consciousness is a part. Yet Searle goes further than this and sees consciousness as the essence of mind, as well as holding that consciousness is a real subjective experience. But the recognition of these distinctions doesn't leave Searle with a fragmented notion of consciousness. He argues that all conscious experiences are part of one unified conscious field. And to reinforce this fidelity to unity, he makes a concession to the structural analysis by making unity as one of the structures of consciousness. Yet Searle's view of consciousness as an emergent property allows systems to exhibit properties that are not present in their individual components. On this view, consciousness emerges from the complex organisation of the brain, and he would thereby agree with Aristotle that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yet Searle also believes that consciousness, like digestion or photosynthesis, is natural biological process. But he distinguishes between causal reducibility and ontological reducibility. That is, consciousness is causally dependent on brain processes, it's not ontologically reducible to them. And he sees the brain as a kind of biological machine that produces consciousness. In this way, Searle is said to avoid the dualistic view that consciousness is separate from the physical world. Yet Searle may avoid Cartesian dualism by relating consciousness to matter through biology. But he still ends up with consciousness as ontologically irreducible to brain processes. So he is ultimately unable to explain or resolve this theoretical and ontological gap. I offer such an explanation towards the end of this series. Yet Searle's perspective does offer another way to address the traditional mind-body problem. That is, by exploring the relationship between mind and the physical body, begun earlier by Heidegger's Being in the World and Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of the Body. Due to Searle's biological naturalism and his rejection of dualism, he's often mistakenly seen to be a dual aspect theorist. Dual aspect theory is that the mental and physical are both aspects of a single underlying reality. But Searle avoids this view because he holds that mind is irreducible to the physical brain. And Searle also rules out other origins of mind than a biological brain, such as in AI. Spinoza is the most notable dual aspect theorist, but others can be argued to share this view. That is, passing over Vedantic Indian thought. This includes Schopenhauer, Mark Sohn, Thomas Nagel, David Chalmers, Ian McGilchrist and Max Wellmans. This, in my view, is an astonishingly long list that is by no means complete. Vedantic thought takes absolute consciousness as the substratum of the universe, even finer than energy. Ian McGilchrist similarly regards matter as a phase of consciousness, and Max Wellmans offers what he calls reflexive monism, that he describes as a seamless psychophysical universe of which we are an integral part, which can be known in two fundamentally different ways. Unquote. Dual aspect theory resolves many of the problems of mind and matter even more resoundingly than identity theory. But like identity theory, the problems it creates are greater than the problems it resolves. Yet to see this in practice, we should return to Spinoza's dual aspect theory as a paradigm in Western thought. And we need to understand that for Spinoza, the physical universe isn't just a manifestation of God. Spinoza's God is synonymous with the universe, matter and nature. That is, the universe is God. And similarly, the human mind is also an aspect of the mind of God. More precisely, Spinoza defines reality into an infinite number of modes of a single substance that is God, and nature or God has infinite aspects of which only physical extension and mind can be known. But remarkably, Spinoza believed that in principle we can know God completely and perfectly. He wrote, "The human mind has an adequate knowledge of God's eternal and infinite essence." And the word adequate for Spinoza means perfect, and that perfect knowledge is attainable through nature, that is, a manifestation of God. Yet here we only need to point out implausible aspects of Spinoza's dual aspect theory that are relevant to dual aspect theory in general. And one of these is the implausibility of a universal substratum that Spinoza finds in God. Another is the difficulty of establishing relations within a supposed total unity. This is illustrated by Spinoza's conatus principle that everything, insofar as it is in itself, endeavours to persist in its own being. But this principle can only look attractive in the absence of evolutionary biology. Yet we can now see many assumptions of such systems of thought that are largely social conventions. These include a belief in a divine principle that may not have the standard features of God, that the world can be entirely understood through rationality, that metaphysics is even possible, that an understanding of the unity of mind and nature is crucial for an ethical life, and that there is a coherent unity of everything. One of the consequences of these assumptions is that secular or scientific versions of dual aspect theory are much harder to maintain. This is because it needs to postulate an underlying substance that is expressed as both mind and matter. And some, like Thomas Nagel, have had doubts about its implications for consciousness and personal identity. Nagel asked, for example, how can I be a complex physical object? How can my subjective identity over time be determined by objective identity of an organism? How can experiences inhere in something with physical parts? And how can sensations have physical properties? Unquote. Yet to avoid problems such as in dualism, as well as I believe for ideological reasons, many thinkers, including Hegel, have adopted what can be considered the dual aspect theory of mind. And dual aspect theory aligns with Hegel's broader philosophical view of absolute idealism. This view emphasizes the primacy of thought and spirit in shaping reality. Hegel's absolute idealism is made possible by his belief in an all-encompassing spiritual entity, the absolute spirit or absolute mind or God, which is the source of all reality. And that reality is a dynamic and evolving process that is unfolding as self-consciousness through history, dialectical process, and indeed mankind. For Hegel, humanity isn't just a product of nature, but is the embodiment of the spirit that has become self-aware. Human history, then, is a journey of the world spirit towards self-consciousness and freedom. And for Hegel, the measure of that advance is measured in terms of philosophical development. My main objective here, however, is the explication of Hegel's dual aspect theory of mind and reality. But we can't avoid commenting on aspects of his philosophy that are conspicuously obvious. One of these is his definition of consciousness as an aspect of the eternal will or purpose. Eternal will or purpose ends up being of questionable significance to the individual human consciousness. And the significance of having an overarching theory seems to be assumed. Another of these anomalies is the implausibility of what is a theological metaphysics explaining the physical world. Even Kierkegaard held that Hegel's philosophy could be only acceptable as a speculative hypothesis. Moreover, Hegel saw his great dialectic as being expressed in particular people and regions, of which he regarded 19th century Germany as the leading proponent, of which he was the leading figure. Of all the criticisms that can be made of Hegel, this seems to be the most undermining. So what can we conclude from our review of fairly common theories of mind that were positivism, behaviourism, identity theory, eliminative materialism, functionalism, naturalism, or biological theories and dual aspect theory? We should also remember our previous discussions of dualism and physicalism, and then we are going to discuss more theories of mind next week. One conclusion is that there are many very different kinds of theories that can't all be right, and this indicates that there is a great deal of confusion concerning the nature of mind or consciousness. This is especially the case when the implausibility of some of these theories is taken into account. Yet I've explicitly argued for an error theory of consciousness that explains this obfuscation. And this obfuscation of consciousness further explains a neglect of the value that I formulate as a principle of life. This is because value is a subjective mental state that is neglected together with consciousness. Yet the nature of value is also explained by theories of consciousness of which it is a part. So next week, as part of this wider objective, I will examine some less common theories that are also great in number. These include pluralism, externalism, panpsychism, panprotopsychism, structuralism, and ultraphenomenological accounts. And these will be able to underpin the character of value even more closely. So let me have your criticisms or comments at the meeting or on websites like Zoom or meetup.com.